I never thought grief could feel so heavy that it cracked you open in places you didn't even know existed. My name is Leora Grayson, and on the day we buried my father, I felt like I was being buried too. Alive, breathing, and yet so far under the weight of what was about to come. I remember the church doors creaking open, the cold wind slicing across my cheeks still raw from hours of crying. The mourners pressed close, whispering condolences that sounded like the rustling of dry leaves. But their words were hollow. What comfort could they give me when I stood alone on the stone steps, watching my stepmother, Rochelle, accept every embrace like she'd lost something irreplaceable? Maybe she had, but so had I. Dad wasn't supposed to die this young. 63. A number that mocked me when the doctor said it, like life had rolled a dice and Dad's number had come up. Heart attack in his sleep. Peaceful, they said. Peaceful for him, maybe. For me, there was nothing peaceful about the emptiness he left behind. We drove back from the cemetery in silence, Rochelle's diamond earring glinting in the sunlight every time she turned her head to glance at me in the rearview mirror. She'd always been beautiful, poised, with those two perfect teeth that gleamed when she smiled. I used to think that smile was meant for Dad. No, I wasn't so sure. Back at the house, people gathered in clusters, filling their plates with tiny sandwiches and pastries no one really wanted. The air inside was warm and smelled of lilies, my father's favorite flower, which now made my stomach twist. I stood near the window, my father's study just beyond the hallway. The door closed now like a tomb of all the memories we made in there. I think I knew then that something was about to break. Maybe it was the way Rochelle's eyes skittered away when I caught her watching me. Or the way my father's lawyer, Mr. Franklin, stood alone, sipping tea like he didn't know where to put himself. I drifted over to him, the hem of my black dress brushing against my calves like a whispered warning. "Leora?" he said, nodding, his eyes kind but tired behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your father spoke so highly of you. He'd be proud of how strong you're being." "Strong?" My voice cracked. "I feel anything but." He placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. "You will be. It's in your blood." But I wondered if he meant that for me, or as an echo of what my father used to say. I felt like a ghost in my own home, drifting from room to room as people offered me sad smiles and patted my hand like I was a fragile ornament that might shatter if they touched me too hard. Thorn in Rochelle's perfectly manicured side. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of warmth in my chest. Maybe I wasn't as alone as she wanted me to believe. I stepped out of the office into the crisp morning air, the letter clutched tight in my hand. It wasn't until the last guest left that Rochelle showed her true colors. I was in the kitchen, scraping leftover cake into the trash, when she cleared her throat behind me. I turned, half expecting an olive branch, maybe some grief we could share together. But her eyes were icy, her lips pulled tight. "Leora, we need to talk." I set the plate down, wiping my hands on a napkin that trembled in my grip. "About what?" Her sigh was so exaggerated, I almost laughed. Almost. "About you staying here." I blinked. "This is my home, Dad's home." "Was," she corrected, voice soft but sharp as glass. "It was your father's home, he left it to me. It's only fair, considering everything I've sacrificed for this family." I stared at her, the world tilting under my feet. "Sacrificed? Rochelle, I'm his daughter. And I'm his widow. The will is clear. I'm not heartless, Leora, but it's time you stand on your own 2 feet. You're 26. You can't cling to your father's house forever." My breath caught in my throat, a cold laugh bubbling up. "Cling? Where am I supposed to go?" She crossed her arms, tapping a manicured nail against her elbow. "I've given you a month. You can stay in your room until then, but after that, well, it's best for both of us. A month. 30 days to pack up every piece of my father that still lingered in the corners. 30 days to pretend I wasn't being thrown out like an unwanted guest. I went to bed that night on a bed that smelled faintly of Dad's cologne. Every creak of the floorboards outside my door like a threat. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it brought dreams of my father standing at the end of my bed, his face blurry, lips moving in words I couldn't hear. Morning light didn't bring relief. Rochelle avoided me in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear as she laughed at something I couldn't quite catch. Her laughter filled the halls where Dad's voice used to echo. I thought about confronting her, begging her to reconsider, but what would that make me? Desperate? I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. So I went to the only place that still felt like mine, the old shed behind the garden. Dad and I built it when I was 16. It smelled of cedar and oil and was cluttered with his tools, the ones Rochelle would probably sell off as soon as I left. I sat on the splintered workbench, fingers tracing the initials he'd carved into the beam, LG plus DG. Leora Grayson and Daniel Grayson. Just us. Always us. Until now. That night, I pulled out the box of papers Dad kept locked in his study. I remembered the passcode, my birthday, the one he never forgot. Bills, old letters, insurance forms. And then, beneath a stack of tax forms, a letter addressed to me in Dad's neat, blocky handwriting. My hand shook as I opened it, the paper creasing under my fingertips. My Leora asterisk. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and if I know Rochelle, she's probably made you feel like you have nowhere to go. But listen to me, sweetheart. You do. I paid the taxes on this house every year in your name. It's yours, legally, if you fight for it. Don't let her scare you out. Be brave. Be my daughter. Love. Dad. I read it again and again, the words searing into my bones. He knew. He knew she'd do this, and he gave me a weapon I didn't even realize I had. The next morning, I tucked the letter into my pocket and marched into the lawyer's office. Mr. Franklin looked up from his desk, startled. Leora, what brings you in? I laid the letter down, my heart pounding. Tell me he's right. Tell me Rochelle can't just throw me out. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the paper with a furrowed brow. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a thick file, and flipped through it until he found what he was looking for. His eyes met mine, a spark of something like hope glinting there. Your father was a smart man, and you, Leora, are about to be underestimated me. She thought grief would make me weak. But it was making me sharper, clearer, more determined than I'd ever been. I would not go quietly. And I would not lose the last piece of my father. Not without a fight. But when I got home that night, I found my room ransacked, drawers pulled out, clothes strewn across the floor like a warning. And there, in the center of my bed, sat Rochelle, holding the letter I'd hidden under my pillow. Her smile was pure poison. Looking for this? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The sight of Rochelle sitting on my bed, that letter, my father's last gift to me, clutched in her perfectly manicured hand, made something inside me snap. I'd spent the whole day feeding a flicker of hope, a fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, I could fight back and win. But now, her smug smile threatened to smother that hope, before it even had a chance to burn. I didn't say anything at first. My eyes darted around the room, taking in the chaos she'd created. My clothes, the framed photos of Dad and me that I'd kept safe since childhood, even my jewelry box, its contents scattered across the floor like worthless trinkets. It was all meant to remind me of who held the power now. I stepped forward slowly, refusing to flinch under her cold stare. Give it back, Rochelle. She laughed, a sound that always grated on my nerves, but tonight it cut deeper than ever. Your father always did underestimate me. He thought he could hide this from me? That you could hide it? She waved the letter like it was a dirty rag. Did you really think a piece of paper would save you? I clenched my fists, my fingernails digging crescents into my palms. It's not just a piece of paper. He paid the taxes in my name. This house is legally mine if I... She shot to her feet so fast the mattress bounced. If you what? Take me to court? Drag this family through a public spectacle while you're barely holding yourself together? I could feel my heart pounding so hard it made my vision blur. But I forced myself to stand tall. If that's what it takes. Her eyes narrowed. She was used to me being quiet, pliable, the dutiful daughter, the obedient stepchild who never talked back. But that Leora was gone. Or maybe she'd been buried under years of biting my tongue, only to claw her way out now when I needed her most. You have no idea what you're getting into, Rochelle hissed. She flicked the letter onto the floor, where it landed in a tangle of my scattered memories. You can't afford a lawyer. You have no job, no savings. I have enough, I lied. I didn't know how, but I'd figure it out. I'd sell the old car Dad left me, pick up extra shifts at the library, even if it meant living off stale coffee and instant noodles. I'd done worse in college. I could do it again. She tilted her head, studying me like I was some interesting bug she wanted to pin to a board. You think you're so strong, but you're not. You're just a scared little girl who couldn't even keep her father alive. It was a cheap shot. And for a second, it worked. I felt the words hit me like a slap. But then, beneath the hurt, anger began to boil. Not the wild, reckless anger that burns out quick, but the deep, simmering kind that sharpens you, that makes you dangerous. I stooped down and picked up the letter, careful not to let her see my hands shake. Keep underestimating me, Rochelle. Please do. She barked out a laugh and stepped closer, so close I could smell the expensive perfume she'd doused herself in before the funeral. Get out of my room. I almost laughed back. It's not your room. Her eyes glittered with something dark. Fear, maybe, though she'd never admit it. We'll see about that. She swept past me, her silk robe whispering around her ankles like a serpent's hiss. I waited until I heard her bedroom door slam shut before I let out the breath I'd been holding. My legs nearly gave out, but I forced myself to move. I gathered my things, what little was left intact, and shoved them into my old duffel bag. Clothes, Dad's watch, the silver locket he'd given me on my 18th birthday. I tucked the letter deep inside the locket's velvet pouch. If Rochelle wanted it, she'd have to rip it from my neck. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while memories of Dad wrapped around me like a frayed blanket. His voice, calm and steady, telling me stories about how this house was his dream, how one day it would be mine, how family meant everything, even when it was broken and complicated. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. Rochelle wanted a fight. Fine. But I wouldn't fight her on her terms. I'd play this smart, the way Dad would have. I'd start by finding out exactly what he did and how deep his protection went. The next morning, I packed a small bag and left the house while Rochelle was still asleep. I didn't bother leaving a note. She'd figure it out soon enough when she realized she couldn't scare me into submission. Mr. Franklin greeted me with the same patient warmth as before, but this time there was a spark of respect in his eyes. He gestured for me to sit, spreading out the documents across his desk like a battlefield map. Your father was meticulous, he said, tapping a thick folder labeled Grayson Estate Taxes. Every year he filed these in your name. He wanted you protected. It's unusual, but legally binding. Will it hold up in court? I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. He nodded. It will if you're prepared to stand your ground. Rochelle will fight you. She has money, connections. But she's sloppy. And your father left a paper trail a mile long. If we push back, she won't have a leg to stand on. I let out a shaky laugh. So I really can do this? You can. But it won't be easy. I don't need easy, I said. I just need fair. He gave me a thin smile. You remind me of your father. He'd be proud. I left the office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. But the moment I stepped back outside, that lightness turned to dread when I spotted Rochelle leaning against my car, arms folded, sunglasses perched on her nose like armor. Having fun playing lawyer? She drawled. I swallowed my fear and met her gaze. I'm not playing. She pushed off the car and stalked toward me, her heels clicking on the pavement like a judge's gavel. You think you're clever, digging through old files, whispering with Franklin like you have any idea what you're doing? You're not a threat, Leora. You're a nuisance. Then why are you here? I asked. If I'm such a nuisance, why bother? Her smile faltered for just a second before she caught herself. I'm here to make you an offer. Sign the house over to me, officially. Walk away, and I'll give you enough to start over somewhere else. A little apartment, maybe a new car. Freedom. I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. You think you can buy me off? Everyone has a price, she said smoothly. Even you. She handed me a folded piece of paper, a check. I didn't even look at the amount. I tore it in half and dropped it at her feet. Her nostrils flared, her polished mask slipping for a heartbeat before she pasted on that chilling smile again. You're making a mistake. I'll bury you in court. You have no idea how ugly this can get. Then get ugly, I said. I'm not afraid of you anymore. Her eyes flicked to the torn check on the ground, then back to me. You should be. She got in her car and sped off, the screech of her tires echoing in the empty parking lot. I stood there, the wind tugging at my hair, my heart pounding like a war drum. I knew she'd make good on her threat. She'd drag my name through the mud, twist the story until I was the villain. but she was underestimating me again. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Dad. About every hour he worked to build something that could last. I wouldn't let her erase that. That night, I didn't go home. I crashed on my best friend's couch. Marcy, the only person who knew every dark corner of my life. She listened without interrupting while I laid it all out, from the funeral to the letter to Rochelle's bribe. When I finished, she shook her head, eyes wide. Leora, this is huge. Do you have any idea what she'll do next? I shrugged, exhaustion settling into my bones. Whatever it is, I'll be ready. Marcy squeezed my hand. You won't do this alone. I'll help. Whatever you need. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel so alone. We stayed up all night, drafting emails to lawyers, researching property law, piecing together Dad's taxes and old payments. Each new discovery made the picture clearer. Rochelle had been living off Dad's money for years, draining his accounts, hiding debts behind fake invoices. And now she wanted to keep it all. By dawn, we had a plan. I'd file a claim to contest the will. I'd prove the tax transfers were intentional. I'd make Rochelle answer for every penny she'd siphoned away while pretending to mourn my father. I packed my bag again, this time with purpose. When I returned to the house, Rochelle was waiting. She stood at the front door, blocking my way, her expression unreadable in the morning light. I hope you slept well, I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. She didn't move. This is your last chance, Leora. Drop this. Walk away. I stepped closer, so close I could see the faint smudge of mascara beneath her left eye. No, this is yours, Rochelle. Drop this. Walk away. For a moment, I saw fear flicker behind her eyes. Real fear. And then, like a storm cloud, it vanished. She stepped aside, her mouth twisting into a cruel smile. Then let's see who survives this. As I crossed the threshold, a cold certainty settled over me. This was more than a fight over bricks and mortar. This was war over the one thing she couldn't stand to lose. Control. I closed my bedroom door behind me and locked it. I had papers to file, evidence to organize, a battle plan to write. I would fight for my father, for our home, for myself. And Rochelle would learn, one way or another, that some daughters don't break, they rise. I would fight for my father, for our home, for myself. And Rochelle would learn one way or another that some daughters don't break, they rise. But rising was harder than I thought. By the next morning, the first blow came like a punch to the gut. I woke up to my phone buzzing non-stop. Calls from Marcy, from Mr. Franklin, from unknown numbers that made my skin crawl before I even answered. When I finally picked up Marcy's call, her voice was frantic. Leora, did you see it? Are you okay? See what? I croaked. My throat felt like sandpaper. I hadn't slept. How could I when every creak in the old house felt like a trap waiting to snap? Check the news. Rochelle went to the press. My stomach dropped. I scrambled out of bed, ignoring the cold floor against my bare feet, and flipped open my laptop. The headline hit me like ice water. Local widow faces legal battle with troubled stepdaughter over family estate. There it was, my name, my face. A photo she'd clearly given them from my old college graduation, cropped so tight that I looked pale and glassy-eyed. Below it, Rochelle's smiling face, posed perfectly at the funeral, eyes red-rimmed and shining for the cameras. I scanned the article, my heart racing. Rochelle had painted me as unstable, vindictive, a grown child clinging to what wasn't hers. She talked about how Dad wouldn't want the house turned into a battlefield, and how she'd tried so hard to make it work. There were lies sprinkled like poison in every paragraph. A quote about me dropping out of school. False. About debts she'd paid on my behalf. Absurd. But the worst part? The comments. Strangers calling me spoiled, ungrateful, a parasite. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I wanted to scream, to rip the wires from the wall and run until the world forgot my name. But I couldn't afford that. Not now. Marcy's voice snapped me back. Leora, listen to me. This is what she wants. To make you panic. You need to hit back. We'll draft a statement, get your side out there. But even as she said it, I knew I couldn't play her game in the court of public opinion. Rochelle had money for PR firms, lawyers on speed dial, reporters who'd lap up every lie she spoon-fed them. Me? I had the truth. And the truth needed more than angry comments and desperate phone calls. I spent that day locked in my room, sifting through every file Dad had left. I read bank statements until my eyes blurred. I highlighted every transaction that showed he'd paid the taxes in my name. I took photos of the letters, the receipts, the notarized forms he'd kept hidden from her. Each piece felt like a brick in the wall I was building to stand behind. But even bricks can crumble under enough pressure. By dusk, I heard Rochelle moving through the hallways. Her steps were unhurried, echoing off the wooden floors like a threat. She didn't knock when she came to my door. She just opened it, leaning against the frame with that same predatory calm. "Nice article, isn't it?" she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "You should thank me for trying to protect you from yourself." I didn't turn around. I kept packing my files into a battered briefcase I'd borrowed from Mr. Franklin. "Get out." She ignored me, stepping inside. "You really think you can fight me, Leora? You don't have the stomach for it. Look at you, shaking just because people are talking. Wait until they start digging. Do you think they'll stop at your old GPA? Or your little incident in college?" My head snapped up. "What incident?" She smirked. "Oh, you don't think I know about that night you got so drunk you passed out in the quad? Or the time campus security found you crying in the library? These people love a good scandal. You're an unstable mess, Leora. And unstable people don't win property battles." Her words coiled around me like a snake. She wasn't wrong. People would believe what they wanted to, and she'd twist every mistake I'd ever made into a weapon. But my father's voice in my head cut through her poison. "Be brave. Be my daughter." I straightened my shoulders, turning to face her. "Get out of my room. Now," she laughed. "What are you going to do? Call the cops?" "If I have to." She tilted her head, studying me. "Fine. But remember this. You started this war. I'm just finishing it." When she left, I locked the door behind her and sank to the floor, clutching my father's letter like a lifeline. I could feel the walls closing in, the shadows growing teeth, but I wouldn't run. Not this time. The next few days were a blur of calls with Mr. Franklin, meetings with other lawyers willing to take my case pro bono when they heard how dirty Rochelle was playing. Marcy practically moved in with me, bringing bags of takeout and stacks of sticky notes covered in legal jargon I barely understood. Together we pieced together my father's intentions. We found old emails where he'd discussed putting the house in my name. We tracked down the accountant who'd handled the tax filings, an elderly man named Peter who remembered Dad fondly. When Peter heard what Rochelle had done, he invited us to his cramped office above a bakery downtown. He shuffled through yellowed folders, muttering to himself until he found what he was looking for. A signed affidavit from my father, dated 6 months before his death. "He told me to keep this safe," Peter said, pushing it across his desk with trembling hands. "Said he didn't trust her. Smart man, your father." I read it twice, my eyes burning. It was clear as day. Dad's signature, notarized, declaring that he'd paid the property taxes for the sole purpose of transferring the house to me. "This is it," Marcy whispered beside me. "This is your bulletproof vest." But even as I clutched that paper, I knew Rochelle wouldn't back down. She'd come at me harder now that I had something solid. And she did. The next morning, a thick envelope landed on the doorstep. An eviction notice. Legal. Sealed. Her name scrawled at the bottom like a flourish on a death warrant. She was trying to force me out before I could file my claim. Marcy found me on the porch, staring at the notice like it was written in a language I couldn't read. "You okay?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "No. But I will be." We drove straight to the courthouse. I filed an emergency injunction to stop the eviction, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the forms. The clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, patted my arm. "You're doing the right thing, sweetheart," she said. "Keep fighting." We left the courthouse exhausted but hopeful. For the first time, it felt real. Like this wasn't just a nightmare I'd wake up from. It was my life, and I was taking it back. When we pulled up to the house, Rochelle was waiting on the front steps, a wolfish smile plastered across her face. She watched as I got out of the car, clutching the injunction paperwork like a shield. "Running to the courts now?" she purred. "How adorable." I held her gaze. "You're not going to win this, Rochelle." Her smile widened. "Oh, but I already have. You're fighting me on my turf. I have friends in high places, judges who owe favors, lawyers who can drag this out until you're broken. I felt Marcy step closer, her hand on my back. Not this time. Leora's not alone anymore. Rochelle's eyes flicked to Marcy, then back to me. For the first time, I saw a crack in her mask, a tiny fracture that made my pulse surge with hope. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. You think you're strong enough for this? You have no idea what I'm capable of. I leaned in until our noses almost touched. Neither do you. She flinched back like I'd struck her. Without another word, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the house, the door slamming behind her like a gunshot. I stood there, the afternoon sun beating down on my shoulders, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Marcy squeezed my hand, grounding me. This isn't over, I whispered. She smiled. Good, because you're just getting started. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the fear and the grief and the exhaustion, I believed her. I was just getting started. But even when you know you're in the right, fighting someone like Rochelle feels like dragging yourself through quicksand. The moment you think you've got solid ground, she yanks it out from under you. The morning after she slammed that door in my face, Marcy and I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, my father's old files spread out like a battlefield between us. The house was so quiet I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Another thing Rochelle would probably sell if she could. But for now, it was mine. The injunction meant she couldn't evict me. Not yet. Marcy sipped her third cup of coffee and looked up from a stack of receipts. Did you know she paid for renovations using one of your dad's hidden accounts? I shook my head. I felt like every day I learned something new about how deep Rochelle's claws went. I don't even remember him talking about renovations. He was always so careful with money. Marcy snorted. Yeah, well, she wasn't. Look at this. She spent $6,000 on a marble backsplash. Who spends $6,000 on a backsplash? I rubbed my temples. Someone who never planned on paying for it herself. Mr. Franklin had been right. She was sloppy. She thought Dad would always be there to cover her tracks, or that no one would care enough to dig. But I did care. And I was digging up everything she'd tried to bury with him. I was deep in a stack of bank statements when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Miss Grayson? The voice on the other end was male, smooth, but there was an edge to it. This is Detective Holland with the County Fraud Unit. I'd like to speak with you about your father's estate. My heart skipped a beat. Fraud Unit? I don't understand. It would be better to discuss in person. Are you home today? I glanced at Marcy, who raised an eyebrow. Yes, I'm home. Good. I'll be there in an hour. He hung up before I could ask anything else. Marcy leaned in. What was that? I repeated the conversation, my mind whirling. Fraud Unit? What did they think my father had done? Or was this about Rochelle? The idea that she could be under investigation made my pulse race with hope. Marcy leaned in. What was that? I repeated the conversation, my mind whirling. Fraud Unit? What did they think my father had done? Or was this about Rochelle? The idea that she could be under investigation made my pulse race with hope. Exactly an hour later, there was a knock at the door. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood on the porch, flashing a badge. Detective Holland. He stepped inside, his eyes sweeping over the mess of files on the floor. I see you've been busy, he said. I crossed my arms, trying to look braver than I felt. What's this about? He pulled a chair from the dining table and sat down, flipping open a small notebook. Miss Grayson, do you know if your father had any offshore accounts? The question caught me off guard. Offshore? No, he wasn't. He wasn't like that. He paid his taxes every year. He hated debt. Detective Holland gave me a small, almost pitying smile. We have reason to believe that large sums of money were moved overseas in the months before his death. Some of those transfers were flagged as suspicious. I sat down hard on the couch. No, that has to be a mistake. If there were transfers, it had to be Rochelle. She had access to everything. She could have forged his signature. Or lied to the bank. He held up a hand. That's what we're trying to find out. And that's where you come in. Do you have any evidence that could prove he didn't authorize those transfers? Marcy handed him a stack of highlighted statements. We found these, and we have an affidavit from his accountant. It shows how careful he was with his money. Detective Holland flipped through the pages, nodding. This helps, but if we can prove she defrauded the estate, you'll have a stronger claim to the house. I felt a tiny spark of hope again. So she could go to jail for this. His expression sobered. If she forged documents or moved money illegally, yes, but it's not that simple. People like your stepmother know how to cover their tracks. If you find anything else, emails, letters, bank slips, call me immediately. He handed me his card and stood up. As he left, I caught Marcy's grin. This could be huge, Leora. If she's guilty of fraud, no judge will side with her in the property case. I wanted to believe that, but Rochelle had a way of slithering out of tight spots. I needed to find something concrete. That night, I sat alone in my father's study, the dim lamplight throwing shadows across the old oak desk. I ran my fingers over the grooves in the wood where Dad used to drum his pen when he was thinking. I opened every drawer, every hidden compartment, hoping for some buried piece of truth. Hours passed. My eyes burned. I was about to give up when I noticed the panel at the back of the bottom drawer, slightly loose, like someone had forced it back into place. My pulse quickened. I pried it open with a butter knife. Inside was a thin envelope, yellowed with age. I slid out a single sheet of paper, a bank statement. One transfer, a large one. But this one didn't go overseas. It went to an account with my name on it. My breath caught. I remembered faintly Dad saying he'd set something aside for me, just in case. But I'd been too busy chasing a job, paying off student loans, pretending I didn't need help. I'd forgotten. The account number was scrawled at the bottom in Dad's handwriting. Underneath, a note. If Rochelle ever tries to take the house, use this. You'll need it. My chest tightened. He'd known. He'd always known what she was capable of. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my old bedroom, the letter pressed to my chest like armor. For once, the shadows outside didn't scare me. Rochelle could smear my name in the papers. She could twist my past and drag every skeleton out of my closet. But she couldn't erase the truth my father had left me. By dawn, I was at the bank, Marcy by my side. The teller gave me a strained smile as I handed her the statement. I'd like to check the balance on this account, I said. She typed something into her computer. Her eyebrows shot up. Would you like to see it printed? Yes, please. She slid the slip across the counter. My hands shook as I read the number. Enough to fight Rochelle in court for years if I had to. Enough to buy a good lawyer, to pay the taxes, to survive while she tried to bleed me dry. Marcy let out a low whistle. Your dad really planned for everything, didn't he? I swallowed the lump in my throat. He did. He trusted me to do the right thing. I spent the rest of that week building my case. Every free moment was dedicated to files and meetings and late-night phone calls with Mr. Franklin. We drafted motions, filed new claims, gathered witness statements. Rochelle fought back at every turn, filing countersuits, leaking more garbage to the press, even showing up at my workplace to whisper poison in my manager's ear. But each time she knocked me down, I got back up, and each time I felt Dad at my back, pushing me forward. Then came the court date, the first real hearing. I stood outside the courthouse steps in my old black blazer and sensible shoes, my stomach churning so violently I thought I'd be sick. Marcy squeezed my shoulder. You've got this, Leora. She can't touch you now. Rochelle stepped out of her sleek town car, dressed like a grieving widow straight from a soap opera. Black dress, oversized sunglasses, crocodile tears. But I saw it in the way her hands trembled when she handed her purse to her lawyer. She was scared. We sat across from each other in the courtroom, two chess players circling the board. The judge called our case. Her lawyer droned on about family loyalty and honoring the deceased's wishes. I wanted to laugh. Dad would be rolling in his grave if he heard this performance. Then it was my turn. I stood up, my knees threatening to buckle. But I opened my folder, laid out every receipt, every letter, every bank statement Dad had left me. When I finished, the judge leaned forward. Miss Grayson, do you have anything else? I took a breath and reached into my pocket, pulling out the letter. The one Dad had written me. the one Rochelle had tried to destroy. I read it aloud, my voice steady even as my hands shook. When I was done, the courtroom was silent. Even Rochelle wouldn't meet my eyes. We wouldn't get a ruling that day. These things took time. But as I walked out of the courtroom, I felt lighter than I had since the funeral. I'd spoken the truth. I'd made sure my father's voice was heard. One last time. Outside, Marcy grabbed my hand. Did you see her face? She knows she's losing. But victory has a way of making your enemies desperate. And that night, when we got home, the front door was ajar. I felt it before I saw it. The wrongness in the air. The smell of something burnt. We stepped inside. The living room was trashed. Files shredded, furniture overturned, the grandfather clock smashed to splinters. Marcy gasped. Leora, your room! I sprinted down the hallway. My door hung from one hinge. The mattress was slashed open. The lockbox where I'd hidden the last of Dad's files was gone. And on my pillow, a single word was scrawled in red ink. Quit. Marcy grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. What are you going to do? I looked at the wreckage of my father's house. The place he'd built with his bare hands, now violated by the woman who claimed to love him. I clenched my fists so tight, my nails bit into my palms. I'm going to finish this. She'd broken my sanctuary. Now I'd break her lies. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. I'm gonna finish this. But those words, powerful as they sounded in my head, tasted like ash when I looked around at the wreckage Rochelle had left behind. Every overturned chair, every shred of paper, every deep slash in my mattress felt like a declaration of war. Marcy stood beside me, her hands shaking as she brushed glass off the dresser. She did this to scare you. She wants you to back down. I let out a humorless laugh. Then she doesn't know me at all. That night we didn't sleep. We sat on the floor, sorting what was salvageable from what was lost. I tried to fight the urge to curl up and sob in the corner, but the rage inside me was louder than the fear. By dawn, I'd made 3 decisions. I would hire private security, get a safe deposit box for what was left of my evidence, and file criminal charges for trespassing and destruction of property. If Rochelle wanted this war, she'd get it. At sunrise, I met Mr. Franklin at the diner downtown. He looked more worn than ever, but when he saw my face, bruised from a falling lamp that had clipped my cheek, his eyes darkened. Leora, he said, sliding into the booth. She's out of control. We need to go on the offensive now. No more playing defense. I handed him the photos I'd taken of the house, every shattered frame and ripped page. We start with a restraining order, I said, and I want to push the fraud charges. He nodded slowly. I spoke with Detective Holland. He says they're close to finding a paper trail that ties the offshore transfers directly to Rochelle. But they need more. Then we'll get more, I said. I know Dad kept backups. He had to. Franklin hesitated, then leaned in. There is one thing. A safety deposit box. He mentioned it once. But the bank manager he trusted retired last year. Rochelle might have tried to access it by now. My heart leapt. Where? Oakwood Credit Union, downtown. He slid a key across the table. Old brass, warm from his pocket. Your father gave this to me before he passed. Told me to hold it for you. I closed my hand around it. Another piece of him. One more sign he'd always believed in me. I left the diner feeling like the morning sun actually meant something for once. Marcy was waiting in my car, her eyes red from worry but fierce with determination. Did he have anything? She asked. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a letter. Short and sharp like Dad always was when he wanted me to pay attention. Leora, asterisk. If you're reading this, then you've learned what Rochelle really is. Good. You always were the smart one. This drive has everything you need. Copies of statements, scanned letters she forged, the name of the investigator I hired to watch her. Trust him. Trust yourself. Love you always. Dad. My throat burned. I clutched the letter to my chest, eyes stinging. Marcy squeezed my shoulder. Let's see what's on the drive. We drove to her apartment, my heart slamming with every pothole. She booted up her old laptop, plugged in the USB, and we watched in stunned silence as file after file appeared. PDFs, signed affidavits, emails Rochelle had deleted, digital scans of checks she'd written to herself from Dad's business account. "This is enough to bury her," Marcy whispered. I nodded, my mind racing. "No more waiting. We take this to Detective Holland today." But Rochelle was faster. By the time we pulled into the station, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stay away from the cops, or the next knock on your door will be worse." Marcy read it over my shoulder. "She's bluffing." "No," I said. "She's telling me exactly how far she'll go." Detective Holland took one look at the files and swore under his breath. "This is gold, Leora. It'll take a few days to verify everything, but this changes everything." "Will she go to jail?" I asked. He hesitated. "She should, but people like her have a way of slipping through cracks. You need to be ready for that." I thought about the letter. Dad's quiet trust in my hands. I am. When we left the station, the sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet. It should have felt like a good omen. But back at the house, I found an envelope taped to the front door. Inside was a single photograph of me and Marcy, taken through the window as we worked on the files. On the back, in block letters, was written, "You can't hide forever." Marcy's face went white. "She's stalking us now?" I crumpled the photo in my fist. She's scared. She should be. We moved everything important into storage that night, shifting Dad's files, the USB, my laptop, into a rented unit with 24-hour cameras. I hired a local security guard to watch the house at night. I refused to live in fear. I refused to let her win by terrorizing me. But the threats didn't stop. The next day, my car's tires were slashed. An unmarked envelope arrived in my mailbox with fake eviction papers, designed to look real. Rochelle's lawyer called, offering one final settlement, sign over the house, drop all charges, and she'd let me go. Marcy and I sat at the kitchen table, the offer between us like a rotting fish. "This is her last move," Marcy said. "She knows it's over." I looked around the house, Dad's house, my house. The walls seemed to hum with his voice, with every memory of us hammering nails into the beams, sanding the floors by hand because he insisted real wood deserved real care. "She can keep her blood money," I said. "I'm staying." The court date came faster than I expected. I wore the same black blazer. This time it felt like armor instead of a funeral shroud. Marcy sat behind me, her hand a warm anchor on my back. Rochelle strutted in, dressed to kill, flanked by her legal team. She didn't even look at me. But when the judge called us forward, I caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. My lawyer laid it all out. The offshore transfers, the forged checks, the fake invoices, the surveillance from Dad's investigator, the photos, the emails, the accountant's affidavit. Piece by piece, the lies crumbled under the weight of Dad's quiet, patient planning. Rochelle's lawyer argued back, emotional manipulation, the stepdaughter's grief clouding her judgment. But every lie sounded hollower than the last. When they called me to the stand, I looked Rochelle dead in the eyes as I told the judge about the threats, the break-in, the letter Dad had left me. When I finished, the courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the judge's pen. "We will reconvene in 2 weeks for the ruling," the judge said. "Until then, Miss Grayson retains the right to remain in the home." Rochelle stood so quickly her chair tipped over. She didn't even pick it up. Her eyes bored into me like black holes. "You think you've won?" she hissed as we left the courthouse. "You don't know what winning costs, Leora." I didn't flinch. "Neither do you." Outside, Marcy wrapped me in a hug so tight I finally felt the exhaustion crack my ribs. "You did it," she said into my hair. "He'd be so proud." 2 weeks. 14 days. I could survive anything for 14 more days. But when we got back to the house, the lock was broken, the security guard nowhere to be seen. I pushed open the front door and froze. The living room was empty. Every piece of furniture, gone. The grandfather clock, Dad's books, the paintings he'd collected on his trips to Europe. All of it stripped bare. On the mantel, a single note. "See you in court." Rochelle had made her final move. She couldn't win the house, so she took everything else. I sank to the floor, my shoulders shaking. Marcy knelt beside me. "It's just stuff," she whispered. "She can't take what really matters." I closed my eyes. Dad's voice rose in the quiet. Be brave. Be my daughter. I would be. And I would win. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. I would be. And I would win. But even as those words echoed through the gutted shell of the house, something inside me knew this was going to hurt more before it got better. Marcy stayed close that night, refusing to leave me alone in the empty rooms. We camped out in my old bedroom, the last place Rochelle hadn't stripped bare, probably because it was still my legal right to be there until the final ruling. The mattress was thin and lumpy. The blanket smelled like stale lavender and the ghost of my father's aftershave. But it was mine. The next morning, I found a note under the front door. 1 week left. No signature. But who else would it be? Marcy found me staring at it, my coffee cold in my hands. Ignore it, she said. She's desperate. I laughed, bitter and low. She doesn't look desperate when she's wiping me clean. She can't wipe you clean, Leora. Not of this. Not of him. I wanted to believe her. But when you see every piece of your past hauled out the door, every book your dad read you at bedtime, the record player he bought you on your 16th birthday, your faith starts to feel like moth-eaten cloth. Easy to tear, hard to mend. Still, the fight was too close to stop. I called Detective Holland and Mr. Franklin, updating them about the break-in, the missing furniture. Holland promised to dig, but even he sounded exhausted. People like Rochelle have cracks to slip through, he warned. If we don't slam the door shut, she'll vanish with everything. So that's what I did. I spent that week boxing up every scrap of evidence twice, locking it in different storage units, scanning backups onto encrypted drives. Rochelle couldn't steal it all. She couldn't erase it from my laptop or my mind. Marcy kept me fed, kept me sane. She handled calls when my voice broke. She threatened the security company until they doubled their patrols. The night before the ruling, I sat in the garden behind the house. The roses Dad planted were half dead, trampled by movers or kicked aside by Rochelle's men. But one stubborn bloom clung to its stem, blood red against the dying green. I cupped it in my hand, feeling the thorns prick my skin. It hurt, but it reminded me I was still here, still rooted. Inside, I heard Marcy's voice through the window. She was on the phone with her brother. He'd offered to lend me money for legal fees if I needed it. I hadn't asked, but she'd done it anyway. When I walked back in, she held out a mug of tea. Couldn't sleep, she asked. I sank into the kitchen chair. Not with tomorrow hanging over me like an axe. She sat across from me, folding her hands. If it doesn't go your way, don't, I said. I can't think like that. She nodded. Okay, then tell me what you're going to do when it does go your way. I smiled despite myself. First, fix the roof Dad always said needed reshingling. Paint the study the color he hated, sunrise yellow. He always called it too cheerful. I laughed, the sound soft and cracked. And then I'm going to plant new roses. For him. For me. Marcy reached over, squeezing my hand. That's the future you're fighting for. Not walls, not furniture. Him, you. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake on the thin mattress, counting my breaths like they were coins I couldn't afford to lose. By morning, my body felt like paper, but when I looked in the mirror, my father's eyes looked back. Tired, yes, but unbroken. The courthouse was gray under a drizzling sky. Marcy parked the car and squeezed my knee. Ready? Ready, I lied. Inside, Rochelle sat across the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my college tuition. Her nails were perfect. Her smile was razor thin. But the tremor in her hands when she reached for her lawyer's file gave her away. When the judge walked in, the room fell silent. My lawyer spoke first, laying out the final evidence, the missing money, the break-ins, the restraining orders, the forged documents. When he finished, the judge turned to Rochelle's side. Her lawyer stammered excuses. He twisted logic into knots so tangled they strangled themselves. Finally, the judge spoke. Miss Grayson has demonstrated a clear and compelling case that the property in question was intended to pass to her through legally recognized means. The fraudulent activities undertaken to circumvent this intention are well documented. Rochelle's mouth fell open. Her lawyer hissed in her ear, but she slapped his hand away. Therefore, the judge continued, the property shall remain with Miss Grayson. A formal investigation into the financial misconduct will proceed. Any personal items removed must be returned within 30 days. Marcy grabbed my hand. I felt the tears before I knew I was crying. My father's house was safe. His plan had held. I hadn't failed him. Rochelle shot to her feet. "This isn't over!" she shrieked. "You can't do this!" The bailiff stepped forward, guiding her out as her voice echoed through the marble halls like a feral animal cornered at last. I sat frozen, the gavel's final strike still ringing in my ears. Marcy pulled me up. "Come on, let's get you home." Home? The word didn't feel like a lie anymore. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked bare, stripped, broken. But it was mine. I ran my hand over the battered doorframe, the scars left by Rochelle's last tantrum. They felt like proof that this place had been fought for, that I'd earned every splinter. Inside, the rooms echoed. The furniture was gone. The shelves were empty. But in my father's study, the sunlight still streamed through the dusty windows, catching on the letters I'd taped to the walls, the ones he'd written me over the years. Each one a promise that I'd never be alone. Marcy unpacked the box we'd hidden in her car. 2 mugs, a kettle, a half-empty bag of tea. "First things first," she said. "Hot water, then pizza. Then we make a list of what you need." I sat on the floor, my back against the wall Dad used to lean on while he read. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt open. Ready. Detective Holland called that night. Rochelle was nowhere to be found. Her accounts were frozen, her passport flagged. She'd tried to run, but her lies had caught up with her. Maybe she'd vanish for good. Maybe she'd resurface one day. But if she did, I'd be ready. I stepped out onto the porch, the night air crisp against my skin. The roses were gone, pulled up by the roots during the chaos. I knelt in the dirt, my fingers digging into the cold earth. I would replant them. I'd start new. Dad had always said that homes grow with you, that they hold you up when your bones feel too weak to stand. I looked at the cracked windows, the peeling paint, the roof that still leaked when it rained. It was imperfect, but so was I, and together we'd heal. Inside, Marcy called from the kitchen. "Hey, homeowner, what do you want on your pizza?" I smiled, brushing the dirt from my hands. "Everything. I want it all." I was free. I was home, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I was free. I was home, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But life, I was starting to learn, doesn't always hand you peace just because you've earned it. Marcy and I spent the first few nights camping out on the floor of the living room. The rooms were empty except for the few things we'd saved. The battered kettle, 2 folding chairs, the box of Dad's letters that had somehow survived every one of Rochelle's tantrums. It felt both fragile and invincible. Like we'd stripped the house to its bones, but the bones were stronger than either of us. The first morning after the ruling, I stood barefoot on the porch, watching the sunrise creep across the old rose beds. They were nothing but churned dirt and dead roots now, but they looked like possibility, a promise waiting to be kept. Marcy leaned against the doorframe behind me, her hair a wild halo in the golden light. "You know," she said, "this would be the perfect time to run away and start a new life in Mexico." I snorted, but it caught in my throat, halfway between a laugh and a sob. "This is my new life, right here." She nudged my shoulder. "Good, because I already ordered new locks, security cameras, and a sign that says, 'Trespassers will be prosecuted.'" That sign went up by noon. It felt silly at first, but standing there, hammering it into the front yard with Marcy's help, I realized it wasn't for Rochelle anymore, it was for me. A line I was drawing in the dirt. This was mine. This was safe. We spent days like that, cleaning, painting, sweeping out the corners where dust and old memories gathered. The more we scrubbed, the more I felt Dad's spirit settle in beside us, like he was nodding, approving every fresh coat of paint and new nail hammered into the walls. But freedom is a funny thing. Just when you think you've grabbed it, you realize you have to hold on to it with both hands. Rochelle might have vanished, but her mess didn't. One evening, I opened the mailbox and found a letter from the IRS. Apparently, Rochelle had run up massive debts using Dad's business accounts, debts they now claimed I was responsible for. The figure made my head spin, enough to gut the repairs I'd saved for, enough to threaten everything I'd fought to keep. I sat on the steps, the letter trembling in my hands. Marcy read over my shoulder, her breath hissing through her teeth. She didn't just steal your house. She tried to leave you holding her bomb. I laughed, bitter and sharp, and here I thought it was finally over. But the laugh didn't last. I spent that night on the phone with Mr. Franklin and the accountant Peter. They reassured me. Rochelle's fraud charges meant the debts could be contested. But contesting meant more court dates, more paperwork, more money. That night, after Marcy fell asleep on the couch, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Dad, about every late night he'd spent hunched over bills and bank statements, trying to make sure I'd never have to carry his burdens. I pressed my palm to the floorboards, as if I could feel him there. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I'll finish what you started." The next morning, I made a choice. I sold Dad's old car, the one he'd spent 3 summers restoring. It gutted me to hand over the keys, but the cash paid for a new lawyer to handle the debts, plus the security system we needed. Marcy offered to lend me more. I told her no, but she left an envelope of cash in my sock drawer anyway. I pretended not to find it for 3 days. One night, I heard something outside. The low growl of a car engine idling too long by the curb. My gut twisted. I peeked through the blinds. Nothing but shadows. Marcy came up behind me. "You think it's her?" I shook my head. "She's gone. Probably halfway to the Cayman Islands by now." "Then who?" I didn't have an answer. But the next morning, I found fresh footprints in the garden. Deep. Heavy. Too big to be Marcy's or mine. It was enough to make me double-check the locks, the windows, the camera feeds. The fear didn't swallow me whole this time, but it crawled under my skin like an old scar itching in the cold. Detective Holland called the next day. Rochelle was spotted crossing into Canada with a fake passport. He said they'd catch her eventually, but I knew better than to trust that promise. People like her slip away through cracks only they can see. So I focused on the cracks I could fix. The roof needed patching. The garden needed replanting. The study needed new shelves for the books Rochelle had stolen. Each small task felt like taking a brick off my chest, one at a time. One afternoon, I found Marcy on the porch with a hammer, fixing the loose step Dad always tripped on. She looked up, sweat shining on her forehead. "Hey, I was thinking maybe we should have a housewarming party." "A party?" I laughed. "You mean a wake for my sanity?" She shrugged. "You fought like hell for this place. You should get to celebrate it. Besides, you need people here. Good people. So the ghosts don't get too loud." I looked around at the empty yard, the dusty porch, the battered door. A party sounded ridiculous. But maybe ridiculous was exactly what I needed. So we planned it. A handful of friends. Neighbors who'd dropped off casseroles when Dad died. Mr. Franklin and Peter. Both of them awkward but sincere in their concern for me. Even Detective Holland stopped by, stiff in his suit but softening when Marcy shoved a paper plate of cake into his hand. We ate on folding chairs and laughed too loudly. Someone brought a cheap radio, the music drifting through the open windows. I felt Dad there, in the warm hum of voices, the scrape of forks on paper plates, the clink of soda cans. Late that night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the garden, looking at the fresh rose bushes Marcy had helped me plant that afternoon. They were small, scraggly, barely clinging to life, but they were mine. They'd grow, one thorn at a time. Inside, I found a note tucked into the kitchen drawer. No signature. Just 5 words. "Not over. Watch your back." My pulse went cold. I knew that handwriting. Rochelle's neat, looping letters. She was gone. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. Marcy found me standing there, the note crumpled in my fist. "She's bluffing," she said. "She can't touch you now." I wanted to believe her, but Dad's voice echoed in my head. "Be brave." So I taped the note to the fridge. A reminder that, even if the war was over, the battlefield never really disappeared. The days passed. The IRS claims dragged on. The old neighbors dropped by with furniture donations. Second-hand couches, chipped tables. Each piece felt like a patch on an old quilt, stitching my life back together one frayed edge at a time. One morning, I found an envelope from the bank. Inside was the final confirmation. The house was legally, undeniably mine. No more loopholes. No more threats. I sat on the porch steps, the paper warm in my hands from the morning sun. Marcy stepped outside, 2 mugs of coffee balanced in her hands. "So," she said. "What now?" I looked at the roses, the new locks on the door, the battered porch step that still squeaked no matter how many nails we drove into it. "Now," I said, "we live." She grinned. "And if Rochelle shows up?" I smiled back, my father's fight burning in my chest. "Then we show her who she messed with." The wind stirred the roses, and for the first time since Dad's funeral, I felt it again, that unshakable truth he'd buried in every corner of these walls. I was stronger than anyone knew, and no one, no matter how hard they tried, could kick me out of my own life again. Now, we live. But living, I was learning, isn't always as simple as breathing. Sometimes it feels like building a house on sand and daring the tide not to come in. The day after I got the final bank letter, I woke up with the sunlight streaming through the cracked window. The house was silent, except for the creak of floorboards under my feet. It should have felt peaceful. But the note Rochelle left taped inside the kitchen drawer still sat in the pit of my stomach like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Marcy was sprawled on the couch, one foot dangling over the side, her mouth open as she snored. I watched her for a second, my heart swelling with gratitude and guilt all at once. She'd given up so much for me, her time, her sleep, her savings. I wondered if there would ever be a day I could pay her back. The roses in the front yard were already growing stubborn shoots, reaching for the sun. It felt like a promise, even as the fear of Rochelle slithered through the edges of my mind. That week, I tried to focus on the normal things. I called the library where I'd once worked part-time, asked for any shifts they could spare. They gave me 2 days a week, shelving books and mopping floors. It wasn't much, but it was something. I dug through Dad's old bills, made a budget that made my head spin. I learned how to fix a leaky faucet by watching hours of videos on my ancient laptop. I hauled broken branches out of the backyard, one wheelbarrow at a time, until my shoulders ached and my palms blistered. Every night I fell into bed too exhausted to dream. But the note stayed taped to the fridge door, whispering reminders I couldn't ignore. One night, I found Marcy standing in the garden, staring up at the sky. The moon cast shadows across her face, making her look like a ghost. "You ever wonder if she's really gone?" she asked without turning around. I crossed my arms over my chest. "All the time." She looked at me, eyes dark. "You'd tell me if you were scared, right?" I opened my mouth to say yes. But the truth hovered between us like mist. I was scared. But I couldn't say it. Not when I needed her to believe I could stand this ground alone. Instead, I said, "She took so much from me. I'm not giving her my fear, too." Marcy nodded, but I saw the worry tighten her jaw. 2 days later, I found my bedroom window cracked open when I got home from the library. The lock was still latched from the inside, but the latch was bent, like someone had forced it, then fixed it just enough to hide the damage. My chest went cold. I called the police, and a young officer named Alvarez came by. He was kind, but his eyes kept darting to the empty rooms, the battered walls. "Doesn't look like anything's missing," he said, scribbling in his notebook. "Might have been kids messing around." But we both knew better. Kids don't leave footprints by the rose bushes, deep and deliberate, pointed right at my window. Marcy bought new locks the next day, but every creak of the floorboards made my skin crawl. I started sleeping with Dad's old baseball bat under the bed. It made me feel stupid, but also safe. Mr. Franklin called with updates. Rochelle hadn't resurfaced. Her accounts were frozen tight, but there were rumors she'd stashed cash overseas, just enough to live on while she hid. Every time I heard the phone ring, I half expected it to be her. It never was, but the silence felt like a promise she hadn't kept yet. One Saturday, Marcy dragged me to the local flea market. "We're not going to let her keep you locked up in this house like a ghost," she said, grabbing my arm. "You need furniture. You need color." We found mismatched chairs, a table that wobbled that had good bones, a floral rug that reminded me of the one Dad used to roll out every spring. I paid in small bills, every dollar feeling like both a loss and a victory. By the time we hauled it all home in the back of Marcy's old truck, I felt lighter. Until we pulled into the driveway. The front door was ajar. My stomach dropped. We hadn't left it that way. Marcy killed the engine. Stay here. Like hell, I said, grabbing the bat from behind the seat. Inside, the house smelled wrong. Like stale perfume and cold sweat. My boots crunched over shattered glass near the kitchen. The note on the fridge was gone. Check your room, Marcy whispered. I did. The bed was untouched, but the floorboard under the window was loose, pried up just enough to show someone had been searching. They hadn't found anything. Everything important was in the safe deposit box now. But that didn't stop the tremor in my hands as I pressed the board back into place. We called Detective Holland. He arrived that night, his brow furrowed as he listened to my halting explanation. Nothing taken? He asked. Nothing left to take, I said. He knelt by the floorboard, his flashlight beam bouncing over the dust. Whoever it was knew exactly where to look. You think it was her? Marcy asked. Holland didn't answer at first. Then he said, if she's here, she's watching. She wants you to know you're not free yet. That night, Marcy stayed up with me. We drank tea on the porch, wrapped in blankets, my eyes scanning the shadows for a shape that never came. What if she's waiting until I let my guard down? I asked. Marcy squeezed my hand. Then you don't let your guard down. Not ever. I wanted to believe it was that simple. But the next morning, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo. Me and Marcy sitting on the porch, mugs in hand. Scrawled on the back, nice roses. My heart slammed against my ribs. Rochelle's neat handwriting. Always the same threat, wrapped in that polite bow. I wanted to scream, to tear the note into pieces and burn it to ash. Instead, I taped it to the fridge beside the old spot where the first one had been. A line of battle scars. Mr. Franklin arranged for extra patrols to drive by the house, but I knew it wouldn't matter if she was careful. The weeks crawled by, each day a mix of small victories. New furniture, fresh paint on the walls, and quiet dread that any moment she'd appear, smiling like she'd never left. Sometimes, I caught myself talking to Dad out loud. I'm trying, I'd whisper in the study as I boxed up the last of Rochelle's leftover junk. I'm trying to keep what you gave me. I'm trying to be brave. The roses grew taller, bright buds opening despite the cold snaps that lingered late into spring. Each one felt like a promise that no matter what Rochelle took, she couldn't pull me up by the roots again. But the next letter changed everything. It came on a Tuesday, the envelope thick and heavy. I sat on the porch steps, tearing it open with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, an unsigned agreement, typed in formal legalese, offering to sell me back my own stolen furniture and keepsakes, for double their worth. The signature line was blank, but the smudged perfume on the paper told me who'd sent it. Marcy found me there, the paper dangling from my fingers. She wants you to pay to get it back? I nodded, my voice a whisper. It's not about the furniture. It's about making me bend. Making me pay twice. Marcy's eyes burned with fury. So what do we do? I took a breath, tasting the fight in the back of my throat like copper. We don't pay her. We find it. And we take it back. Because this wasn't about couches or clocks. It was about my father's memory. It was about proving that no matter how many times Rochelle knocked me down, I'd always get back up. So I stood, the roses brushing against my shins as the wind stirred their leaves, and I made myself a promise I knew Dad would be proud of. I would get it all back. Every piece. And Rochelle would learn, once and for all, that you can't bury what refuses to die. I would get it all back. Every piece. And Rochelle would learn, once and for all, that you can't bury what refuses to die. But vengeance, like roses, takes its time to bloom, and this time, I was going to plant it deep. Marcy and I sat on the floor of the empty study that night, the unsigned ransom letter spread out between us. She ran her finger over the words, her brow furrowed so hard I could see the lines digging deeper than the ones Rochelle had left on my walls. She wants to make you crawl, Marcy said. Wants you to beg for scraps of your own life back. I know, I said. My voice was so steady I almost didn't recognize it. But she slipped up. She told me she still has it all. Which means she's hiding it somewhere. And people like Rochelle, They get greedy. They can't help but leave trails. Marcy smiled, her teeth flashing in the dim light. Then, let's hunt. We started with the obvious: pawn shops, storage units, moving companies. I spent hours on the phone, lying through my teeth about being a buyer looking for vintage furniture, or an estate sale scout. Each conversation felt like throwing rocks down a well, just echoes coming back up. But then, on the fourth day, I found a crack. A man named Teddy answered my call at a warehouse an hour out of town. He was jumpy, his voice a reedy whisper. Yeah, I got a shipment last week. Some fancy stuff. Clocks, old books, real nice chairs. Lady paid me cash to keep it off the books. My heart thudded so loud I could barely hear my own words. Did she give you a name? He coughed. Nope, just said, you'll know me when you see me. And believe me, I did. Scariest smile I've ever seen. Lady looked like a snake in a Sunday hat. Rochelle. No doubt. I thanked him, promised him an envelope of cash if he let me take a look. Marcy and I were on the road in 20 minutes. The old Civic rattling so hard on the highway I worried it might shake apart before we got there. Teddy met us at the back entrance of the warehouse, his eyes darting like a rabbit's. I didn't say nothing to nobody, he said, unlocking a rusted steel door. Just don't tell her you talked to me. Your secret's safe, Marcy muttered. Inside, the place smelled like old dust and motor oil. But there, stacked in a corner behind dusty tarps and a half-broken jukebox, was my life. Dad's old armchair with the frayed armrest. The record player he'd bought in 1985. The grandfather clock. Cracked glass, but still ticking, stubborn as I was. My throat tightened. She just left it here, Teddy shrugged. Said she'd be back to sell it off piece by piece, but she ain't come back yet. Marcy pulled out her phone and snapped photos of everything. We have proof now, we can file a claim, get the cops involved. I nodded, but my chest was hot with a rage that tasted old and deep. She wants me to pay to get it back. Marcy touched my shoulder. So we don't. We take it. I laughed. A low, fierce sound I hadn't heard from myself since the day Dad died. Let's do it. The next week was a blur of legal motions. Mr. Franklin helped file an emergency injunction to stop the sale of my property. Detective Holland promised to get a warrant. But the law crawls while snakes slither fast, and I knew Rochelle wouldn't wait forever. Marcy and I went back to the warehouse every night, just to make sure the stuff was still there. We slept in shifts, drinking stale coffee from a vending machine, jumping every time headlights swept across the parking lot. It was on the third night that we saw her. Rochelle's sleek black car crept into the lot, its headlights off. She stepped out, wrapped in a coat too thin for the cold, her hair pulled back so tight it made her look sharp enough to cut glass. I watched her through the crack in the warehouse door, my breath freezing in my throat. She stalked around the crates, checking locks, tapping her long nails against the clock face like she owned time itself. Then she pulled out her phone, speaking into it in a low hiss I couldn't make out. When she glanced our way, Marcy's hand closed around mine so hard it hurt. After a few minutes, she got back in her car and drove off into the dark. The echo of her tires on gravel felt like a promise. I'll be back. Marcy let go of my hand. We have to move it now. Agreed, I said. We called Teddy. He wasn't thrilled, but money talks and fear talks louder. Midnight, he said. No cameras, no receipts. If she finds out I helped you, I'm a dead man. She won't find out, I promised. And if she does, she'll have to go through me first. That night, we loaded every piece into a borrowed truck. The grandfather clock wobbled on its wheels, its ticking echoing through the empty dock like a heartbeat. Marcy drove, her knuckles white on the wheel. I rode in the back, my arms wrapped around Dad's old armchair like it was him. We hid it all in the neighbor's barn 2 roads over Mr. Kilpatrick, a wiry old farmer who'd known my dad since they were kids. He didn't even flinch when I knocked on his door in the middle of the night, explaining what we needed. Daniel Grayson was a good man, he said, spitting tobacco into an old coffee can. Anyone who messes with his daughter messes with me. He gave us keys to the barn and promised to keep watch. I drove back home with Marcy just before dawn, my heart racing with fear and adrenaline. Rochelle would come looking for it. But she wouldn't find it. Not this time. 2 days later, the warrant came through. Detective Holland raided the warehouse officially, finding nothing but dust and broken shelves. Rochelle showed up during the sweep, acting innocent as a lamb, spinning some story about an anonymous buyer who must have moved it. But I saw her eyes when she looked at me, sharp and feral, like she knew exactly what I'd done. That night, another letter appeared in my mailbox. You think you've won. You never will. I tore it up without reading the rest. Marcy burned the pieces in the fire pit out back, the ashes scattering across the new rose bushes we'd planted along the fence line. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of hammers, Mr. Kilpatrick's boys helping me move the furniture back into the house before Rochelle could sniff out where it had gone. The grandfather clock took its old place in the hallway. Dad's armchair sat in the study, the frayed armrest fitting perfectly against my elbow as I curled up in it that night. It didn't matter that the paint still peeled or the roof still leaked. My house was whole again. Easy Cly was whole again. Marcy fell asleep on the couch, her hand resting on the new coffee table we'd found at the flea market, Dad's battered record player spinning a scratched old jazz record. I stood in the doorway, staring at the people who'd held me up when everything else wanted to bury me. Rochelle could send 1,000 more notes, but she'd never understand this. Roots don't die just because someone tries to cut them. They grow back stronger, deeper. Outside, the roses swayed in the wind, stubborn and bright in the moonlight. Inside, I whispered to the empty house, to my father's memory, to the girl I'd been before all this started. You did good. We did good. And I knew, deep in my bones, that if Rochelle ever came back for another round, she'd find me ready. You did good. We did good. But peace is fragile when you know the enemy who broke your world once is still out there somewhere, like a splinter in your skin you can't dig out, no matter how hard you try. The weeks after we brought Dad's things home were strangely quiet. Too quiet. It felt like waiting for a storm that never came. Marcy teased that maybe Rochelle had finally found another rich idiot to bleed dry on some tropical beach. But every time the mail truck stopped at the end of the drive, I felt my chest seize, bracing for another threat. It didn't come. Not in words. Instead, it came as shadows. One night, I woke up to the grandfather clock chiming 3. The house felt too still, the air too heavy. I slipped out of bed, my feet brushing the cold floorboards, and padded to the window. There, parked under the old oak by the curb, was a car I didn't recognize. Its lights were off, engine running. I watched it for a long minute before it pulled away, tires crunching the gravel so softly it might have been a ghost. I told Marcy the next morning, expecting her to tell me I was paranoid. But she didn't. She just looked at me, her eyes sharp. We're changing the locks again. So we did. Twice. We set up extra cameras, bought motion lights that flickered on at every possum and wandering raccoon. And still, the car came back. Always between 2 and 4 in the morning, never staying long enough for me to catch a plate number. Detective Holland shrugged when I called him. Could be her, could be someone she hired, could be nothing. But I knew better. Rochelle didn't do nothing. She planted seeds, watered them with fear, waited until you were too tangled up in your own dread to fight back. Well, not this time. By the 3rd week, I was done waiting. I borrowed an old camera from Marcy's brother, parked myself by the window every night. Coffee thermos and a blanket like a soldier in a trench. I snapped blurry photos of headlights, silhouettes, anything I could catch. I even started a log. Times, weather, license plate guesses when I got close enough. It wasn't much, but it was something. Meanwhile, the roses bloomed taller than they ever had. Every morning, I'd stand on the porch, barefoot in the dewy grass, pruning back dead petals. It felt stupidly symbolic, cutting away rot so something better could grow. Marcy said I was obsessed. Maybe I was. But obsession kept me standing when the whispers of Rochelle's threats tried to wrap around my throat. One afternoon, I came home from the library to find an envelope wedged under the doormat. No name, no return address. Just one word scrawled in that too-perfect handwriting I'd come to hate. Soon. I didn't show it to Marcy. Instead, I slipped it into my journal, pressed between pages full of budgets, repair lists, little scribbled letters to Dad I knew he'd never read. That night, the car came back. This time, it pulled all the way into the driveway. Headlights off. Engine idling. I could see the outline of a figure behind the wheel, a pale oval of a face. I pressed my phone against the window, snapping photo after photo. The flash caught on the glass, a tiny flicker of light. The car peeled away so fast I nearly dropped my phone. Gravel scattered across the yard, pinging against the porch steps like hail. I printed the photos at the pharmacy the next day. Blurry, grainy, but enough to show Holland. He frowned when I handed him the envelope and the pictures. "This crosses a line," he said. "I'll run the plates, see what we get." But I knew Rochelle was careful. She'd never tie her own name to something so obvious. If she was behind the wheel, she'd vanish again before the ink dried on any warrant. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the grandfather clock ticking behind me like a heartbeat. Marcy came in, hair wild from sleep, and dropped into the chair across from me. "We need a plan," she said. "We have a plan," I shot back. "We wait, we document." She slammed her palm on the table, the echo rattling my teeth. "No, Leora, we make her scared for once." It was the first time I'd seen fire in Marcy's eyes that matched the storm in my chest. So we made a list. Neighbors who owed Dad favors. Friends from the library who hated bullies. Local businesses who remembered Dad helping fix their taxes when they couldn't afford a lawyer. One by one, we asked for eyes. Watch the street. Note the car. Call me, no matter the hour. By the end of the week, the network was alive. Old Mrs. Daly, from 2 doors down, even sat on her porch with a pair of binoculars, wrapped in 3 blankets and sipping bourbon from her tea mug. "Ain't nobody messing with Daniel Grayson's girl," she'd said with a cackle. The car came back 2 nights later. But this time, it didn't slip away unseen. Mrs. Daly called me at 2:13 a.m. "It's here, baby." Parked by the roses. I threw on my boots and coat, Marcy right behind me. We stepped out onto the porch, flashlights cutting through the dark. The car sat there, engine purring low. I could see the driver now. Definitely a woman. Blonde hair pulled back. Sunglasses at night. So typical of Rochelle it made my stomach twist. I raised my phone, flash on. "Smile, Rochelle." The driver didn't flinch. Just revved the engine. Then the passenger window rolled down. A single white envelope fluttered out, landing in the yard. The car backed down the drive, taillights winking like devil's eyes before it vanished into the night. I grabbed the envelope, heart hammering. Inside was a single photo. Me, Marcy, Dad. A family portrait from when I was 10. On the back, Rochelle's script. "Not your family anymore." Marcy took it from me, her breath shaking. "She's trying to break you." "She can't," I said, and I almost believed it. But the days got harder. Every creak of the porch boards, every flicker of the motion lights sent my heart racing. The roses started to droop. Too much cold too late in the season. The roots were strong, but even roots get tired of fighting rocks and frost. I spent my nights rereading Dad's letters, tracing the words until the ink blurred. "Be brave. Be my daughter." So I stayed, so I fought. One morning, Marcy woke me with a tap on my shoulder. "Come outside," she whispered. I stepped onto the porch, the air sharp with the promise of snow. Parked across the street, abandoned in front of the old church lot, was the car. Windows down. Empty. Detective Holland arrived within the hour. His team combed the interior. Gloves, evidence bags, quiet murmurs that made my skin crawl. Inside the glove box, they found a scrap of paper. Rochelle's handwriting. But this time, it wasn't a threat. It was an address. A storage unit on the edge of town. Marcy looked at me. "You think she's hiding there?" "Or she wants me to think she is," I said. "It's bait." Holland agreed. "You want me to check it first?" I shook my head. "No, I'm done letting her lead. I'm going myself." Marcy grabbed my arm. "You're not going alone." So we went. The 3 of us, Marcy, Holland, and me, rolling down that back road while snow started to fall. The storage lot was a row of rusted doors, each one the same dented blue. Unit 24 sat at the end, padlock hanging loose. Holland cut the lock with bolt cutters, pushing the door up with a screech that set my teeth on edge. Inside, the unit was empty except for a single box. I stepped forward, hands trembling. Marcy whispered, "Careful." I opened the box. Inside was another photo, me at the courthouse on the day of the final ruling, looking small and pale. Taped to it was a key. A cheap motel tag dangled from it. Room 6, Wild Pines Inn. Holland swore under his breath. "She's playing games." Marcy looked at me, eyes wide. "What do we do?" I closed the box. My heart felt like a stone in my chest. "We finish it. We finish it." The words sounded braver than I felt standing there in that cold, musty storage unit with the key dangling from my fingertips. The snow fell harder outside, flakes collecting on my hair and shoulders as we stepped into the pale glow of the streetlight. Marcy stood beside me, her breath fogging the air. Detective Holland slammed the storage unit shut with a clang that echoed down the row of doors. "This could be a trap," he said. "She wants you to come to her." "Then we show up," I said, "and we don't flinch." Marcy shivered. "You think she's waiting there?" "She wants me to see her," I said, my voice low. "She wants me to look her in the eye and know she's not done." We didn't waste time. The Wild Pines Inn was 15 miles down the highway, tucked between a closed gas station and an abandoned diner. The neon sign flickered in the falling snow, casting the parking lot in sickly pink light. Room 6 sat on the end, its window dark, the door warped and chipped. Holland cut the engine, glancing at me in the rear view. "If she's in there, you stay behind me." Marcy squeezed my hand. "You sure about this?" I shook my head. "But I'm going anyway." The wind howled through the gap under the door as Holland slid the key into the lock. I heard it click, the sound sharp as a gunshot. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, flashlight sweeping across the stained carpet and the peeling floral wallpaper. The room was empty, except for the bed. On it, an envelope sat propped up against a lamp, Rochelle's elegant handwriting curling across the front. "Leora." I stepped forward before Holland could stop me. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside, another photo. This one of my father, younger than I ever remembered him, standing in front of the house he'd built with nothing but sweat and stubborn hope. Taped to the photo was a note. "You think you've won, but houses are just wood and nails. People are what break. See you soon." My knees buckled. Marcy caught me before I hit the floor. Holland snatched the note from my hand, reading it under the harsh yellow light. "This is an open threat," he said. "She's escalating." "Let her," I rasped. "I'm not leaving my home." "No one's asking you to," Marcy said fiercely. "She wants you to run. She wants you scared. Don't give her that." We drove home in silence. The snow turned to sleet, tapping at the windows like cold fingers. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I could see footprints in the fresh layer of white, circling the porch, weaving through the rose bushes. She'd been here again while we were gone. Holland called in a patrol car to park at the curb. "She's not getting close tonight," he promised. But his eyes told me what he didn't say. "If she wants in, she'll find a way." Marcy made tea while I sat on the living room floor, staring at the grandfather clock ticking away the hours Rochelle was stealing from me. I felt the fight draining out of me, pooling at my feet like dirty water. But then I looked around. Dad's chair, the record player, the roses outside under a blanket of snow. Pieces of him, pieces of me. "We're going to end this," I said. "Tomorrow." Marcy raised her eyebrows. "How?" "We find her. And this time, we don't wait for her to play the next move." Holland helped. He put a trace on her known aliases, her fake passports. Mr. Franklin called every storage unit within 50 miles. Marcy dug through social media, old friends who might have sheltered Rochelle. It felt like chasing smoke in a snowstorm, and then, 2 days later, a break. An anonymous tip called into Holland's office. "She's at the old Grayson warehouse." My father's old business property. The one Rochelle had tried to sell behind my back before the taxes forced her hand. It was half collapsed now, roof caving in, windows boarded up like a corpse left to rot. I knew it was her. Of course she'd go there. One last reminder that she'd always find a way to worm her way into every memory Dad left me. I told Marcy to stay behind. She refused. Holland said it was too dangerous. I ignored him. By dusk, the three of us were parked across the street from the warehouse, the snow crunching under our boots as we crossed the cracked pavement. Holland pushed open the side door, his gun drawn, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The smell of mildew and old oil hit me like a slap. Inside, the warehouse was silent, except for the drip of water from the broken pipes overhead. Shadows pooled in the corners. My breath fogged in the cold air. And then I saw her. Rochelle. Sitting on a broken office chair in the middle of the floor, her hair slicked back, her coat wrapped tight around her bony shoulders. "Leora," she purred, her voice echoing. "Come to claim your prize?" "I came to finish this," I said. She laughed, the sound thin and sharp. "You think you've beaten me? You think any of this makes you strong?" Holland stepped forward. "Rochelle Sinclair, you're under arrest for—" She ignored him, her eyes locked on mine. "Your father would be ashamed of you. Crawling through lawyers and courtrooms like a rat in a trap." My anger rose, hot and clean. "My father would be ashamed of you." She stood, her frame frail, but her eyes burning with that old, vicious fire. "I gave him everything. I gave him life when you were too selfish to—" "Enough," I shouted. "You gave him nothing but pain. You took and took and took, and you think you can still take from me?" She stepped closer. Holland blocked her path, cuffs in hand. "Don't move," Rochelle sneered at him. "What will you do? Arrest me? I'll be out in days. I always come back." Marcy stepped up beside me, her voice shaking but strong. "Not this time." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out every letter, every threat she'd sent. I threw them at her feet. "This is who you are, Rochelle, and you can't hide it anymore." Holland moved fast. The click of the handcuffs snapped through the cavernous room. Rochelle's eyes went wild, her mask cracking. "You think you've won, you stupid girl. You have no idea what winning costs." I stepped close enough to smell the stale perfume on her skin. "I do now, and I'll pay it every day if I have to." Holland led her out into the snow, her curses echoing behind us. Marcy turned to me, her eyes brimming. "It's really over." But as I looked around that broken warehouse, I knew it wasn't really over. The wound she'd left wouldn't vanish overnight. The house still needed fixing. The debt still lingered. My grief for Dad still ached in my bones. But for the first time, the air felt clear. We walked back to the car in silence. The snow fell soft around us, settling on my hair, my shoulders, my hands. I felt Dad there, in every flake that touched my skin. Marcy slid her arm through mine. "Let's go home." And this time, home didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a promise I'd kept. And this time, home didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a promise I'd kept. When we got back that night, the house was dark, except for the porch light Marcy had left on before we'd driven out to the warehouse. The roses, buried under a blanket of fresh snow, lined the walkway like sleeping sentries. As I stepped onto the porch, I pressed my palm to the wood railing Dad had built. For the first time in so long, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. Marcy closed the door behind us, locking it with a satisfying click that echoed through the empty hallway. The grandfather clock ticked steady and strong, like a heartbeat reminding me that time would keep moving forward, whether Rochelle tried to steal it or not. Holland called the next morning. They'd processed Rochelle's arrest, found more than enough evidence to hold her this time. False accounts, fake documents, proof of threats and harassment. "She won't be seeing the outside for a long while," he said. I almost didn't recognize the relief in his voice. "You did good, Miss Grayson." But winning felt strange. I expected to feel lighter, but instead it was like laying down a heavy box I'd carried so long. I didn't remember what it felt like not to hold it. Marcy must have seen it in my face as I stood at the window, staring at the rose bushes trying to peek through the snowdrifts. "You did it, Leora. You really did." I turned to her, my throat tight. It doesn't feel real yet? She crossed the room, pulling me into the hug I didn't know I needed. That's because you've been surviving for so long, you forgot how to live. I laughed, but the sound cracked like ice. So what do I do now? She stepped back, hands on my shoulders. Now? You fix this place up like he always wanted. You open those windows when spring comes. You plant more roses. You throw open the doors. You live here. Really live here. Her words dug roots in my chest, deeper than Rochelle's poison ever could. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't magic. But slowly, piece by piece, I put my father's house back together. The repairs took months. I learned how to patch drywall and unclog ancient pipes. Marcy painted the front door a bright, stubborn blue that made the neighbors raise their eyebrows. It's your fortress now, she said. It should look like one. I got a second job at the local community center, teaching kids how to read. Every paycheck felt like one more brick in a wall that could never be knocked down again. Some nights I'd fall into bed too tired to dream, but those nights were the best, because when I woke up, the house was still mine. In the spring, the roses came back stronger than ever. Their roots wrapped tight around the old stones, refusing to be pulled up. I spent mornings out there with pruning shears and a mug of coffee, talking to Dad like he was standing just over my shoulder. One evening, Marcy knocked on my bedroom door. A grin spread wide across her face. Come outside! I stepped onto the porch and gasped. A small group of neighbors stood around the front yard, each holding a rose bush in a pot. Mrs. Daly, wrapped in her ancient fur coat, stepped forward. Figured you could use some help filling in the empty spots. They planted them with me, their laughter mixing with the spring breeze. Each root pressed into the dirt felt like another nail in Rochelle's coffin. Another promise that this house would never belong to anyone but me again. They planted them with me, their laughter mixing with the spring breeze. Each root pressed into the dirt felt like another nail in Rochelle's coffin, another promise that this house would never belong to anyone but me again. After everyone left, Marcy and I sat on the porch steps, the sky bruised with dusk. She nudged me with her shoulder. Do you feel it now? I thought about it. The fight, the sleepless nights, the fear that used to wrap around my throat every time I heard a creak in the hallway. I thought about Dad's voice in my head, telling me to be brave, to be his daughter. Yeah, I said, my smile soft but real. I feel it now. A few weeks later, I got the final letter from Mr. Franklin. The last of the debts Rochelle had forged cleared. The house deed officially transferred, untouchable by her or anyone she might send crawling out of the shadows in my future. I stood in the kitchen holding that letter, the weight of it pressing into my palms. The grandfather clock chimed behind me, its hands sweeping past midnight like a benediction. Marcy peeked around the corner. Want me to make tea? I shook my head, pressing the letter to my chest. No, I want to sit in the garden. We carried 2 blankets out to the porch, wrapped ourselves tight, and watched the moonlight touch the roses. For once, the shadows didn't feel like threats. They felt like quiet secrets my father left behind. In the days that followed, people asked me why I stayed. Why I didn't sell the place, take the money, run somewhere new to start over. But they didn't understand. This house wasn't just walls and floors. It was Dad's laugh echoing down the hallway. It was the smell of cedar and oil in the shed. It was the roses he planted, the taxes he paid in my name, the quiet way he protected me even after he was gone. This house was me. And when I looked around, at the painted door, the patched-up roof, the photos taped back on the mantel, I saw a woman Dad would have been proud of. A woman who refused to break even when someone tried to bury her alive. Marcy stayed. Sometimes in the guest room, sometimes on the couch after we stayed up too late watching old movies. She said she'd move out eventually, but I knew better. This was her home too now. She'd fought for it right beside me. We'd fought for each other. One morning, as I trimmed the roses back for the summer, I found an old piece of wood Dad had buried as a marker for where he wanted to build a gazebo one day. It felt like a sign. So I saved up every extra penny, took a weekend carpentry class at the community center, and built it myself. It was crooked in places, but it stood strong, just like me. Sometimes I still hear Rochelle's voice in my dreams, hissing that winning costs more than you know. Maybe she was right. Maybe it does. But I paid it, and I'd pay it again 1,000 times to stand here now. bare feet in the grass, roses brushing my calves, the wind carrying the promise of everything Dad ever wanted for me. This house is mine, this life is mine, and no one will ever kick me out again. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.